The Goblins Glare. The goblin was hideous. He smiled up at me from the floor of my bedroom. He had hairy warts all over his face, green scales covered his arms. His dirty fingernails were long and pointy. Boy, I'm glad this goblin is only made of construction paper, I said to my friend Karen. He's the scariest thing I ever drew. He's very creepy, Karen agreed, staring at the goblin. Totally cool though. The trick-or-treaters will freak out tomorrow night when they see him. Karen and I are best friends. We're in the same class. Her favourite subject is science. Mine is art. Someday I'm going to be a well-known artist. I, Mike Mason, will be famous all over the world. Famous for my gross and scary paintings, but for Halloween I figured I could just be famous all over the neighbourhood. The goblin was for the front door of my house. I wanted to make it so frightening it would give people nightmares. Karen was sitting at my desk working on our costumes. We were both going to be werewolves. Mum had given me an old fake fur coat that we cut up. Karen was gluing the pieces of fur onto 2 old sweatshirts and 2 old pairs of bicycle shorts. I turned back to my goblin to add some more warts, but after working for a few minutes, I let out a sigh. "What's wrong?" Karen asked. "My goblin is scary, but I want him to be terrifying," I complained. I ran my hand over my short blonde hair and stared hard at the goblin. "Wait a second, I see what's wrong. His eyes are too droopy. He can't be really scary if he looks sleepy." Karen watched as I dipped my paintbrush into some white paint. Wake up, I shouted at the goblin. I held the brush over his face. "You have to be the most horrifying goblin to haunt the neighbourhood." Then I painted huge white eyeballs over its sleepy ones. I added a black dot at the centre of each eye. The effect was awesome. It made the creature seem really angry, even a little bit crazy. "You are such a good artist," Karen said. Then she picked the goblin up carefully. She didn't want to smudge the wet paint. "Come on, let's go hang him on the front door." I grabbed some tape and we hurried downstairs. Just as we were finishing, Mum came home from work. "Mike, that's a horrifying creature," she said, shaking her head. "You'll give people nightmares." "That's what Halloween is all about," I answered happily. "People are supposed to have nightmares." Mum lifted one eyebrow, as if she wasn't too happy with me. I stared at the goblin. His strange, buggy eyes seemed to stare right back at mine. I shivered. Maybe Mum was right. Maybe the goblin was too scary. If only I had known how right Mum was. "Let's go to one more house," Karen urged. It was late on Halloween night. We had trick-or-treated all over the neighbourhood. Now we were back on my block, standing on the corner. I didn't want to stay out anymore. I'd been fine all night, but suddenly I had a somebody is watching me kind of feeling. I glanced around. The street was empty. All the other kids had gone home. Most of the houses were dark. "Okay, Karen," I gave in. "Just one more house." We headed toward a house lit by a dim porch light. We turned onto the path that led to the front door, and I screamed. The goblin! My paper goblin! It popped out of the bushes and charged at us, its long yellow toenails scraping the sidewalk. It wasn't paper anymore, it was alive, with thick, scaly arms and fingernails as sharp as knives. "Run!" I yelled to Karen. I dropped my trick-or-treat bag and took off. Karen followed. We ran as fast as we could, but the creature ran faster. We heard its long toenails clicking on the sidewalk close behind us. Its raspy breath echoed in our ears. I glanced over my shoulder. The goblin opened its mouth in an evil sneer and bolted up the walkway. "Mum!" I screamed, pounding on the door. I could hear the creature's toenails clicking up the walk. "Open the door, please!" The door swung open. "Mike, what in the world? Close the door!" I yelled. Karen and I leaped inside the house. "Close it now!" Mum shut the door with a loud bang. I bolted up in bed, gulping air. "What a horrible dream," I moaned. My heart was pounding. I was soaked with sweat. It was Halloween morning. I crawled out of bed with a groan and stumbled to the bathroom. I brushed my teeth, splashed some water on my face and tugged on my clothes. I grabbed my backpack and hurried downstairs. After that frightening dream, I wasn't in the mood to eat breakfast. I headed straight for the front door to check out the goblin. I opened the door slowly. There he was, hanging on the other side. I stood in front of the goblin. It seemed to stare back at me. I took a few steps to the left. The The Goblins Glare seemed to follow me. I took a few steps to the right, and same thing. A chill ran down my spine. Don't be stupid, I told myself. The goblin is just door decoration. Its eyes can't move. It's just an optical illusion, or something. After school, I headed to my locker. Karen came up behind me. Want to walk home together? She asked. Sure, I answered. We can decide where we want to go trick-or-treating tonight. As we walked, the afternoon light grew dim, and a chilly wind began to blow. I pulled up my collar and shivered, but not because of the cold. I had that creepy feeling again, as if I were being watched. What's the rush? Karen asked as I began walking faster. I'm just a bit cold, I mumbled. I walked even faster. I glanced over my shoulder and gasped. Karen jerked her head around. We both screamed at the same time. It was the goblin, for real this time. The creature grinned its evil grin. Its crazy eyes bulged out of its sockets. It pointed its long fingernails at me and opened its mouth to speak, but I didn't hang around to listen. I grabbed Karen and we ran. We charged down the street, swerved around the corner and bolted for my house. I could hear the goblin behind us scraping along, its crusty yellow toenails clicking on the sidewalk. I can't run any faster, Karen gasped. Don't slow down, I cried. I glanced over my shoulder. It's closing in on us. My sides ached, but I didn't slow down. I ran up to the front door, yelling all the way, Mum, Mum, open up the door, let us in. The door swung open. Karen and I charged inside. Mum, close it now, I yelled. The door shut with a loud bang. Close what, Mike? Mr. Galloway, my teacher, asked impatiently. I blinked. The kids in my class stared at me. They laughed and snickered too. I was still in school. I'd fallen asleep. Nothing, I mumbled. Never mind. Mr. Galloway went on with his social studies lesson. I couldn't believe it. I had the same awful nightmare in class. 2 nightmares in a row. I had to make sure this second nightmare would be the last. Before I met Karen on Halloween night, I had something important to do. I found my art supplies. Scissors, paper, paint, and glitter. A little snip, a little colour, and there they were. Eyelids. I went downstairs and opened the front door. The goblin gave me its ugly stare as I taped an eyelid over each of its eyes. I taped each one down with 5 pieces of tape. It worked. With its eyes closed, the goblin didn't look scary anymore. It almost looked peaceful. The knot in my stomach started to relax. Sleep tight, I told the goblin. I know I will. No more nightmares for me. I put my costume on at Karen's house. I was afraid the glued-on fur was going to fall off, but we started out looking great. Trick-or-treaters paraded all over the neighbourhood. We met 2 other werewolves, but Karen and I were the only ones with real fake fur. My bag was full in no time. I stuck my hand in and raked through all the candy. Wow, I may have to go home and get another bag, I told Karen. Then I froze. I had that creepy feeling again, as if someone was watching me. My heart began to thud. No, I whispered, not again. Karen lifted her mask. Mike, what's wrong? My arms and legs began to shake. I felt hot and cold at the same time, and suddenly it was hard to breathe under my mask. I yanked it off, but I still couldn't breathe. It's only a nightmare, I told myself, a dream, a bad dream, but this time I was going to do something about it. This time I was going to stop the nightmare before it started. Karen was still talking to me. I didn't bother to tell her the goblin was about to chase us. After all, it was only a dream. I threw away my Halloween bag and started running. Mike, Karen cried, where are you going? I kept running. I didn't answer. I made it to my block and raced toward my house. Just as before, the street was deserted. Just as before. Mum, open up the door! Just as before, the door swung open. Only a few more seconds and the nightmare would be over. I ran into the house. Close the door, I yelled. Close it now! But this time, there was no loud bang. The door shut quietly. I've been waiting for you, a deep voice growled. It wasn't Mum standing in the front hall. It was the goblin. It pointed at me and laughed. Why are you doing this to me? I demanded. You wanted me to be scary, the goblin replied. So, how am I doing? Am I scary enough? This is just a dream, I told it. A dream. Get it? Pretty soon, I'm gonna wake up, then you'll be history. The goblin scraped its fingernails together, back and forth, as if it was sharpening them. My pulse raced. Where was Mum? Was the front door going to bang and wake me up? "Mum," I yelled out at the top of my lungs. "Where are you? Wake me up, hurry!" The gurgling laugh rose out of the goblin's chest. "Go ahead, laugh," I shouted. "As soon as I wake up, I'm going to rip the drawing off the front door and tear you into 1,000 pieces." The goblin laughed even harder. "Mum," I called out again. I ran into the living room. I ran into the kitchen. No, Mum, the downstairs office was empty. The goblin's footsteps echoed behind me. He followed me through the house, slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. I ran upstairs to my room and slammed the door. I had to keep the goblin out. I needed time to think. I pushed my big bookcase in front of the door so the creature couldn't get in. Scrape, scrape. I could hear the goblin's toenails click up the stairs. I backed away from the door and tripped over one of my old sneakers. I fell onto the bed. Yow! I jumped up. Something was in my bed. I yanked back the quilt and gasped. There I was, in my bed. Me, Mike Mason. I was standing over my bed, watching myself sleep. How could this be? Scrape, scrape. The goblin dragged itself along the upstairs hall. No time for questions. I gazed down at the sleeping me. "Wake up!" I shouted to myself. Bam! My bedroom door burst open. My bookcase fell over. Everything crashed to the floor. That noise had to wake up the me who was sleeping. I turned back to the bed. No, the Mike in bed still slept. The goblin lumbered into the room. I grabbed the shoulder of Mike in bed and shook it hard. "Wake up! Wake up!" The Mike in bed rolled over and pulled the covers up. The goblin's upper lip curled into a sneer. "It's no use, Mike. You can't escape me anymore. I'm going to get you." It dived for me. It tripped over the bookcase and stumbled to its feet. I leaned over the bed and grabbed the shoulders of the sleeping Mike. I shook him with all my strength. "Wake up! Wake up! Make this nightmare stop!" The goblin threw back its head and roared with laughter. "That won't work, Mike. You can't wake yourself up. This nightmare is not going to end." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "I can wake myself up." "No, you can't, Mike," the goblin declared. "Because I'm not in your dream. You're in mine." "Huh?" I gasped. "You are in my dream," the goblin repeated. He glared at me hungrily. "And I don't plan to wake up because we're just coming to the best part. The part where I have my dinner." Just kidding, guys. It's just me. Hey, look, if you are after more chills, thrills, and... did I mention chills? Please subscribe to the Leftovers channel. I'll be doing a whole bunch more super spooky material, especially the Goosebumps book reading. I've tracked down every single one of those 10 tales to give you goosebumps, and I will be reading each story. So subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you can keep getting notified. You know how the system works. And yeah, tune in next time for some more Leftovers from the Leftover Culture Review.